Hey you guys, it is Professor Vitt and I'm here to walk you through mock exam number 1. A couple of important points. Number 1, every single one of your questions will be drawn from this exam. So you don't need to look in other spots, you can focus your attention here and that should help you. Number 2, and this is very important, I encourage you all to try and answer 1 through 18 right now. So maybe pause, look at 1 through 18, see if you know the answers to them, write them down, pretend that you're actually taking the test. Why? Well, this is just a smart way for you to take advantage of your neural architecture, just the way that your brain works. Your brain learns better and remembers answers longer when you try to answer a question first without being told exactly what the answer is. So I can't stress this enough. If you want to do super well, do yourself a favor. Take 20 minutes right now, try to answer these questions on your own, and then compare them to the model answers I'm about to give. I think you'll find that you'll remember the answers better because you've tried to answer them and you did or you didn't correctly, and your brain tends to understand information that it's already organized or attempted to organize. It can recall it a little bit easier rather than just memorizing answers. Okay. Here we go. So I'm going to go through these questions. Now I'm going to give the answers to each of these questions. I have them on another sheet. You'll be able to read them, but I'm not giving you the PDF with the answers in it. So here we go. If you want to, hit pause now, try to answer these questions on your own. And then when you are done, then you can listen to the answers and compare them, and I think it'll help your learning. Okay, here we go. Just a quick side note also on the exam before we start in. There are no multiple choice, there are no fill in the blanks, there are no true false. These are just straight up short answer questions on the exam. So here we go. Oh, and also, very important, if you don't know the answer when you're taking the exam, write something down. If you write down something and it's still a bad answer, I can give you half of the points on it, right? Because you're trying, right? And that's easier to recover from rather than missing all of the points. So it's always worth it to try. I never penalize you for what are called mistakes of commission. I'm not going to say, oh no, you get marked off because you talked about something that wasn't relevant and you got it wrong. But I will give you points for effort and for trying and for approximating the answer or getting close to it. All right, here we go. Number 1, what is logic? Logic is the study of argumentation. There you go. Simple, sweet, easy to memorize. Number 2, Alice is walking through Wonderland. She sees the cookie below. Is the expression on the cookie, right here, eat me, a statement? Why or why not? Well, a statement is a sentence that can be true or false, right? This was one of our first definitions. And when I say can right here, I said capable of being true or false. In the definition, either one is fine. The expression eat me does not make a claim that is true or false, right? If somebody sees this cookie, they don't say, well, that's false. Eat me, false. I'm not going to eat you. I mean, you might say I'm not going to eat the cookie or I am going to eat the cookie, but you wouldn't say true or false, right? And that's because this is a piece of advice. So the expression is not a statement because it cannot be true or false. Okay, I hope that was helpful for number 2. All right, number 3. Now there is a brief little set of directions on this. Hey. That's not correct. Okay, there is a brief set of directions on your... No, okay, it's not. All right. There will be a one-line sentence. I don't know why it's not on there. Here it is. Write the following passage in standard form. So what I'm going to ask you for number 3 is to write, and I'll put it on the exam, write this passage out in standard form. Remember, standard form is just a fancy way of saying write out the argument so that I can see the premises, which are the reasons that I am giving to support my conclusion, right? So here we go. This is our paragraph. The flying saucer was either shot down, captured by the government, or it never existed. The government did not get the saucer, and I know it's false that it never existed, so it must have been shot down. What? Okay, so here we go. Premise 1 is just the first sentence. It's giving us these 3 options, right? The saucer was shot down, captured, or it never existed. The government did not get the saucer, right? So that would negate this one here. Right, so that's number 2. Number 3, I know it's false that the saucer never existed. So this last one here gets wiped out. And so that leaves us with our conclusion. Thus, the flying saucer was shot down. Right here, it's our only option left. Right, so that's our argument. Premise, 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 conclusion. And now, number 4, we have a question saying, now, please explain whether the argument you wrote out above is valid and or sound and why. Okay, so now, an argument is valid if it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. An argument is valid if the premises, if true, guarantee the conclusion. A sound argument is an argument in which is valid and the premises are actually true. Okay, so let's start here with valid, and then I'll cover soundness in a second. The argument is valid. Here it's not possible for 1, 2, and 3 to be true and the conclusion to be false. This is because the first premises list the possible options, shot down, captured, never existed, and the next premises, 2 and 3, remove 2 of those options, thus 4 lists the last option available. 4 has to be true because we assumed premise 1 was true, and the only option that hasn't been proven false makes number 1 true. So right here, that's essentially what I just said. Now, soundness. I'm not going to ask you for soundness on this, but I am going to review what soundness is, okay? Remember, an argument is sound if, 1, it's valid, and 2, the premises are actually true. Now, in this case, we do not have enough information to determine whether or not this argument is sound. It is valid, but we just don't know whether it's valid. Why? Well, the reference here, the flying saucer. Well, what are we referring to? This phrase doesn't have anything that it's picking out in the world, so we can't tell whether it would be true in the world. It's incomplete, right? So when that happens, you would just say, soundness for this argument cannot be determined. That would be fine. Or if you want to get fancy, you'd say the facts are silent as to soundness of this argument. But don't worry, I'm probably going to remove that soundness for this question, so you won't have to dodge it. Remember, soundness is asking whether or not a valid argument is actually correct out there in the world. And so I'd need to know enough about the world to determine immediately whether the argument is going to be sound or not. And so I'm seldom going to give you a close call. If it's a sound argument, believe me, you will know. Okay, number 5. So this is going to be a question that's going to ask you about whether you understand the difference, if you understand induction enough to apply it to a particular circumstance. So here we go. Everyone in town knows and loves Juan the werewolf, but Juan does not like being a werewolf. He comes to you distraught and says, well, I changed into a werewolf on the full moon for the past 8 months, so I guess it's a complete certainty that I will change into a werewolf forever. Can you explain to Juan whether it's a complete certainty that he will change into a werewolf forever? Be sure to explain to Juan what type of reasoning you're using and why that reasoning does or does not support his claim. Big, huge answer here. Look, your answer may differ significantly from this, but as long as you get the general strokes in there, you're going to be fine, right? So here's how I wrote this. And I wrote this at one pass. I didn't go back and proof it, so I'm trying to copy how you guys would be doing the exam, right? So if this passage looks to you like it's not perfect or it's not written well, that's okay. You understand that the standard for a test doesn't have to be grammatic perfection, but it needs to be enough to understand, right? To understand what's being said. Okay, Juan, there are 2 types of reasoning, induction, deduction. But I only need to tell you about induction to ease your troubled mind. Induction is a kind of reasoning in which premises support but don't guarantee the conclusion. We use induction to generalize from specific instances to other instances, right? Things that we haven't perceived yet. And this way, we use induction to generalize that the past will look like the future. But it may turn out that the future doesn't look like the present or even the past. In your case, although you've turned into a werewolf for the past 8 months, there's no guarantee that this will continue to happen because we don't know that the past will continue to look like the future. Another way to put this is to say that it may be likely that you'll turn into a werewolf next month, but it's not a done deal. There are lots of reasons why you won't change into a werewolf There are lots of reasons why this should say there may be lots of reasons why you won't change into a werewolf next month. It could be that a special witch casts a spell and it removes all the werewolves from the earth. You could die and your body will no longer transform. The moon could be destroyed, and without it, you might not change into a werewolf. Rest easy, my friend. You may not be a werewolf forever. There you go. Okay, so the idea is, look, tell me about induction, that premises support the conclusion, but they don't guarantee it. Then apply it to this circumstance and say, Juan, look, in this case, the premises are all of those past transformations that you had. But even though you've been transforming into a werewolf for 8 months, it doesn't mean you're going to continue to do that forever. And that's because you're using induction to make that jump. And what we know about induction is the premises can support the conclusion. They might make it true, but it's not a slam dunk. And there are lots of things that could happen that would make it such that you don't transform into a werewolf next month. Like the moon could be destroyed, or you could be killed, or any number of things, right? So there you go. You're consoling a werewolf who's concerned about his ways. Number 6. Why does it matter that we study logic? Provide 4 reasons and be sure to explain each. Okay, so I've got these down here and I'll run through them. Put the brain in charge. Studying helps logic develop the rational parts of our brain. And when that part of our brain is developed, it's the outside part, the neocortex, it lets us make better decisions, right? Because we can think more deeply about what the consequences of those decisions would be. And we can also think more critically about the number of options available to us, right? Number 2, logic is self-correcting. As opposed to emotions, logic is capable of correcting itself when it's in error. Emotions, though they're a super important part of life, aren't like this. And so that's the difference, right? Does that help? So the idea is, look, some people have emotional responses to problems. Like, suppose somebody responds to racial segregation with hate. Well, that hate will never correct itself, right? But you might have a chance if you start discussing with someone logically what's going on. You talk about, well, if everyone behaved this way, what would things look like? Or if what you say is true, what also must follow, right? And so people do this. They debate about different topics, and as a result of that debate, we slowly grind out these self-correcting truths. Okay, number 3. Better logic, better thinking, better life, right? Good thinking is good living. There's no other way around that, right? A better understanding of logic allows us to think more clearly and deeply about the decisions we face. With greater clarity and depth of thought, we'll find our thoughts more likely to be true. It's not a slam dunk, but it helps. Number 4, logic and reality share a shape. By studying logic, we can understand more about the world. The example here, you don't need to tell me about it, but the example I'm thinking of here is this: if you're in San Francisco, then you're in California. You're in San Francisco, therefore you're in California. That's an argument form. It's called modus ponens. You don't need to know that. But the idea is, look, I wouldn't even know what the world looks like if that argument wouldn't hold, right? It's just part of how I understand what San Francisco is and what California is, that if I'm in San Francisco, that I'm also in California, right? And so logic tries to copy, or it shares a shape with the world. Okay, number 7, let's make it happen. Here we go. Now, I haven't seen this argument before, this exact argument, but it does kind of copy some stuff that we've seen. So in particular, the Roberto as a professor example, I think, is pretty close to this one. It may not be exactly the same, but it's pretty close. It might be the same, but it's close enough that hopefully this will jar your memory. So the instructions for number 7. State whether the following argument is valid or sound and explain why. All right, premise 1, all serpents eat eggs. Premise 2, Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent. Number 3, Quetzalcoatl eats eggs. Thus, Quetzalcoatl eats eggs. Okay, validity. So now I've got the mock answer here in yellow. Notice one thing. I started this answer off and I said validity is, and then I put C problem 4 above. Soundness is C problem 4 above. You do not need to continually write and rewrite the same definitions to me in order to demonstrate understanding. If you write out soundness and validity once, that's good. Just refer to it repeatedly throughout your paper. So it's important. You can't just say, okay, I've already defined them forever and I never need to do that, because the prompt is asking you, well, okay, right, I need to know what these things are in order to tell you whether the argument is valid or sound. So just say validity is, see above, da da da, like I did here. Okay. An argument is valid if it's not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. An argument is valid if the premises, if true, guarantee the conclusion. A sound argument is an argument which is valid and the premises are actually true. Okay, so this is just definitional stuff. You don't need to include both of these definitions for validity. One of them would be fine, but some students prefer one, some students prefer the other. There is a small difference between the two, but we don't actually get into it at this point. If you really want to know sometime, ask me at the end of class and we can chat about it. Okay, the above argument is valid because if 1 and 2 are true, then 3 must also be true. If it's true that all serpents eat eggs, and it's true that Quetzalcoatl is a serpent, then necessarily Quetzalcoatl eats eggs. In other words, if the premises are true, then they force the conclusion to be true also. The above argument is not sound because it's not actually true that all serpents eat eggs. Moreover, it's not clear that it is actually true that Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent. If it's known to be true that Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent, maybe it was open to inspection or something, then the argument would be sound. But the facts are not clear enough, thus the argument is valid but not sound. I'm never going to give you a question on an exam where you don't know, like, what's Quetzalcoatl, and what's a feathered serpent, and what's happening here, right? But you can see how in logic, you can begin to understand an argument and whether or not it's good without understanding what all the terms refer to. And the reason why you know the argument is good because it shares a form with another argument that you know is valid, right? So to some degree, mentioning these weird things is intentional. It helps you to focus on the structure of the argument rather than what it's saying. Okay, number 8. State whether the following argument is valid or sound and explain why. Number 1, most professors have bionic arms. Number 2, Angela Davis is a professor. 3, thus Angela Davis has bionic arms. Okay, again, validity is this, soundness is, right? So validity is, see problem, whatever above. Soundness is, see problem, whatever above. I put 7, but it could be 4. Whatever your first definition of validity, wherever you give me your first answer, you can just always refer back to that same question, right? That same answer. The argument is not valid. Here, even if it is true that most professors have bionic arms, and it's true that Angela Davis is a professor, then it doesn't follow that Angela Davis has bionic arms, right? But if premise 1 said all professors have bionic arms, then the argument would be valid. Most is one of these terms, we call them quantifiers, we'll get into that later, but it's a quantificational tool that's a little sticky. Look, 1 could be true, 2 could be true, but 3 could still be false because although most tells us about the ratio, or roughly about the ratio to professors who have bionic arms and those who don't, it doesn't tell us where Angela Davis is in that heap. And so 3 would just be a guess, right? It would almost be an inductive argument, but I'm expressly asking you to evaluate whether it's valid or sound. So I'm asking you to treat it as a deductive argument. Okay. Number 9, state whether the following argument is valid or sound and explain why. Number 1, no cats smoke crack. To my knowledge, that's true. Number 2, Sylvester is a cat. 3, therefore Sylvester doesn't smoke crack. All right. So again, I'm asking for validity and soundness, and I'm referring to my prior answers above. In this case, it says 7, but it's 4, right? So just refer me up to your first answer. The argument is valid because if no cats smoke crack and Sylvester is one of the cats, then he doesn't smoke crack. In other words, if the premises 1 and 2 are true, then the conclusion 3 must be true. Okay, so does that make sense? I cannot determine if this argument is sound. This is because I have no way to evaluate who or what Sylvester is. If the term referred to an actual cat who had not smoked crack, then the argument would be sound. There are no such facts present, right? So this is a good example of a way to answer the question when you're not quite sure, right? You're still demonstrating understanding without saying, who knows, right? Just say, well, look, I can't determine if this is sound, and that's because I don't know who Sylvester is, and so I don't know whether or not out there in the world Sylvester is a cat or he's somebody else, right? Okay. Number 10 and 11, these are, you guys will only recognize number 10. We're going to cover number 11 in class on Monday, which will be Monday the 18th. What does the Hulk have to tell us about validity, soundness, and logic? Okay, just as the Hulk is a monstrously strong creature, the tools of validity and soundness are equally strong. Validity and soundness allow one to cut through and smash misunderstandings. The way to think about this is to think about the absolutely Herculean, the enormous strength of the Hulk, and how really nothing seems to be able to stop the Hulk. The same thing is true when you have a good command of logic and you encounter somebody who doesn't, right? And it just becomes very difficult for that person to try and advance any arguments because they don't understand the relationship that needs to hold between premises and conclusions and so forth. And so repeatedly, right, people who aren't as well versed in logic tend to not do as well in argumentation because they're not familiar with the tools. Okay, so look, validity and soundness are strong tools, and so is the Hulk. That's your answer. All right, number 12. Is ouch a statement? Why or why not? A statement is a sentence or expression which can be true or false. If someone said ouch, it would be incorrect to reply true or false. And that's because ouch doesn't say something that is true or false. Okay. Number 3, I ask you what a premise is. What is a premise? Premise is a statement which supports a conclusion. What is a conclusion? What is it? A conclusion is a statement which is supported by premises. What is inductive reasoning? How is it different from deductive reasoning? Short answer. Inductive reasoning is when the premises of an argument support but do not guarantee the truth of a conclusion. Deductive reasoning is when the premises of an argument guarantee the truth of the conclusion, right? It's not possible for the premise to be true and the conclusion false. Just straightforward application. If you're stuck and you can't remember, induction, right? Inductive, it means the premises kind of support the conclusion, but not all the way. Whereas deductive means duh, the premises totally support the conclusion. Duh. Okay. Number 16. State whether the following argument is valid or sound and explain why. All right. Now, you guys don't know who Simone de Beauvoir is, but I will tell you now. She was a French philosopher. Brilliant. So here's our argument. I want you to state whether the argument is valid or sound and then tell me why. So you've done a few of these already. Number 1, all humans have 9 noses. Number 2, Simone de Beauvoir is a human. Thus, Simone de Beauvoir has 9 noses. Okay. Validity is defined as this. Soundness is defined as this. In other words, whatever your problem number is, let me know. Just refer to it above. All right. The argument is in fact valid. Here, if it was true that all humans had 9 noses, and it was also true that Simone de Beauvoir is a human, then it would necessarily follow that Simone de Beauvoir has 9 noses. So the argument is valid. This argument is not sound because 1 is false, right? All humans do not have 9 noses. So you know that that's false, so it's not sound. Okay? That would be a really nice, clean, easy test question for me to give to you, right? Because it's very obvious whether or not premise number 1 is true. Number 17. State whether the following argument is valid or sound, and again, explain why. If it is raining, then Professor Vitt is carrying his umbrella. That's premise number 1. Premise number 2, Professor Vitt is carrying his umbrella. Thus, number 3, it's the conclusion. Thus, it is raining. Okay. Validity is defined as see above. Soundness is defined as see above. This argument is not valid. This is because even if premise 1 is true, right, and Professor Vitt happens to be carrying his umbrella, which would make premise number 2 true, it doesn't follow that it's raining, right? I could be carrying my umbrella for another reason. Perhaps I'm carrying the umbrella because it's super hot, or I'm you know, I'm concerned for my defense and I'm going to fight off a monster or something like that, and I need the umbrella. There are a lot of reasons why I could be carrying an umbrella. But 1 and 2 both being true does not mean that 3 has to be true. Remember, we want to build our arguments so that we force our conclusions to be true. That would be the best possible form of an argument that we could generate. Okay. Yeah, okay. Number 18. What type of argument is this? Explain why. All right, so hopefully this will refresh a little bit of your memory. This is our last question. Congratulations, you made it. Number 18. What type of argument is this? Explain why. Number 1. Premise number 1. A clock is complex. Premise number 2. A clock has a designer. Number 3. The universe is complex. Thus, the universe has a designer, right? So, this argument is an inductive argument. It's one in which the premises of the argument support, but they don't guarantee the conclusion. Here, if 1, 2, and 3 are true, they could support the conclusion. They might give it some support, but it's still possible that 1, 2, and 3 are all true and 4 is false, right? So remember, yeah, that's correct, right? 1, 2, and 3 help the conclusion, but they don't necessarily make it true. All right, that does it, you guys. So if you are able to understand all of those 18 questions, I think you'll find, oh, remember you have an extra credit question. I think you'll find the exam to probably be somewhere around half of those 19 questions. So probably around 10 or 11 with an extra credit question. Remember, that extra credit question is going to ask you just to identify the types of induction. So I'm not going to ask you to explain them, but you need to know that there are these different ways of thinking that are abduction. And I might throw in another extra credit question, but I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be. Okay, you guys, I hope that's helped. If you have questions, please let me know. I'm happy to try and answer them. I'll do everything I can to answer emails the night before the exam, but I typically go to bed pretty early. So if you email me the night before and I don't get back to you, it's probably because as you're writing it, I'm asleep. But if you look the next morning, I'm very likely to respond. Okay, you guys, thanks a lot. Good luck on this exam. You'll do great.